have it your way.
Of course there are. I mean...
Technically, the neighboring...
I haven't...
Actually, it's for...
Neither...
You need to make this lady a... Why what? Stop thinking. Take her down. You're not? Okay then. Just keep on admiring the boat then, unburdened by envy.
Of course there are. I mean...
Technically...
I haven't...
Actually, it's for...
Neither is...
You need to... Why what? Before you do, it might be pertinent to ask a few more questions. Learn whatever you can about this boat of hers.
Of course there are. Yes.
Technically, the neighboring ozone and...
Okay, if you want to get technical. The point is, we're all on islands here, and sail is still the most... I haven't seen...
Actually, it's...
Neither...
You need to... Before you do, it would be pertinent to ask other questions. Gather more info on this boat of hers.
The boat? No. It is called Kortek 19, because that's the type of sloop it is. It's a pleasure craft. A 19-pacer. It also happens to be rated for Category 1 racing. Though these days, I mainly use it for business. My sloop? I like it a lot. It's the eel's hips, baby.
I'm enjoying this part of the interview. It has so little to do with the murder we're investigating.
Officer, I assure you I'm a highly qualified pleasure craft operator.
The crowns of her teeth are porcelain, white as the boat's hull as she smiles. Her nonchalance might be related to something called the Wayfarer Act, a law that says she doesn't need a license. Sly Fox, you're not aggressive enough to harass her further on this.
Good. What would you like to know? Oh my, the E word. You mean to say that it's a symbol of conspicuous consumption? That I'm a member of the ruling class?
Detective, may I remind you that Mrs. Messier is a professional negotiator?
Then what does that say? Does it say, docking reserved for residents of Rue de Saint-Ghislain, 33A? 33A? This old proletarian haunt here? As I said, plenty of people drive boats, of all social strata.
Your synapses flesh.
Okay, it is anti-centennial. I assure you, they drove quite a hard bargain for this space. But you're right. I am a bourgeois woman, and this is my fast, lightweight, interminably bourgeois boat. Good. Everything. Right up to, but not including, trade secrets. First, you'd have to repeal the Emergencies Act of Trade in Aliments that gives me the right to silence. It's quite the octopus. Good luck is only kept in place by the vested interests of half the civilized world, including your own.
What the ma'am means is that the Emergencies Act and the RCM both get their authority from the coalition government.
You'd be shooting yourself in the foot, in other words.
But I am derailing us. You wanted to know about the strike. First, you'd have to repeal the Emergencies Act of Trade in Aliments that gives... I am glad you see it that way. To repeal the act would mean repealing the coalition government. The one that leases you the right to police West Revachol.
You'd be shooting yourself in the foot in a...
But I am derailing us. You wanted to know about the strike. I believe the official title is Senior Labor Negotiator. In practice, I'm a grocery clerk. I relay the union's demands to Wild Pines and return with Wild Pines' counteroffer.
And how are the talks going?
They're not. That's the problem. The union stopped all negotiations a week ago, after that awful lynching took place.
Wait, she just admitted that the lynching and the strike are connected.
Now they won't even let me into the harbor. There's a 2-meter-20 racist behemoth blocking the gates. Yes, I believe there is a connection, but that's a subject for later. What can I say? The union employs a giant covered in tattoos. A racist giant. I guess that's part of their big tent organization now. Let's say I was not making the kind of progress I'd hoped for when I first arrived.
And when did you first arrive?
I arrived 3 weeks ago. Yes, in the middle of February. The bay was still partially frozen then. I prefer to do these things on site, like the RCM.
But the strike began in December.
I wasn't the original negotiator here. I took over after Mr. Gaumont hit a wall with Mr. Clare, the union boss. Mr. Clare refused to speak with Gaumont despite concessions he'd granted the union in prior negotiations.
This isn't the first time the union has gone on strike.
Heavens no. There have been 2 prior strikes. Both times the union won significant concessions, including overtime pay and a medical plan. This time their demands are more, I guess you could say, aggressive.
Ludicrous even. It's meant.
Mr. Clare told him to... how did he put it? Fuck off, midget. Gaumont is short of stature, you see. Keep in mind, this is a negotiator Mr. Clare has worked with before, and who was more than fair with him and the union. There are leaflets everywhere, and banners. What did they say again? Oh yes. Every worker, a member of the board.
Most of the workers probably don't know what that means.
Fortunately, they explained it. Every time the Wild Pines group makes a decision about anything, it needs the signature of each of the 2,200 workers in its Martinez terminal. Just so you understand, this is but one of 22 terminals owned by Wild Pines. Essentially, not only are they kings of the company, they are also kings of the 72,000 employees of Wild Pines Group. They're having a blast. But how can they afford it? After 4 months, my assumption was they would prefer a more practical solution. I'm not sure. Naturally, I assume that was just their opening position, a hard-nosed tactic with a side of mockery. But there's been no follow-up, just the same nonsensical slogan repeated over and over again. And now, people are getting lynched, I hear. Behind the whirling in rags. A disastrous situation if there ever was one.
Excuse me, from whom did you hear about this lynching?
I first heard it from the boyer at the gates. The one whose very name advertises his aversion to work. I think he said it was, "Call me mañana."
This checks out.
Everard Clare is a man of the utmost integrity. If you can say one thing about him, it's that he always puts the interests of the workers first. Of course not. Everard is fantastically corrupt. I imagine he has a thick, viscous goo where you and I have blood. He is the most corrupt individual I have ever seen, and I deal with men like him for a living. If there is anyone more venal, more irredeemably nepotistic, then it's his twin brother, Edgar. Yes, Edgar looks exactly like his brother, except for that lazy eye. He also talks exactly like Evrart does, and when one's term as foreman is up, the other takes over. It's how they circumvent the term limits, you see, with a funny little switcheroo. While in office, they've embezzled God knows how much of their workers' dues. The Debardeurs Union was once a perfectly normal institution. 20 years ago, anyway. It must not have been easy to establish under the Emergency Act, but they did it. I can respect that. Organized labor at its best, as they say. Then something happened in the local chapter elections. The brothers Clare came and transformed it into a... how do you say?
A mob. The Debardeurs are a crime syndicate. Sad as it may be, I suspect we'll be forced to cooperate with them.
Refreshingly honest, officer. The company has tried appeasing in the past, but I'm afraid our concessions have only emboldened Evrart and his brother. And your opinion, Detective, if I may ask? I'm a curious and talkative person, you see. Would you say the Debardeurs Union is... Of course, officer. Evrart... Of course not. He is the most corrupt individual I have ever seen, and I deal with men like him for a living. Have you seen him? Edgar looks exactly like his brother, except for that lazy eye. He also... It's how they circumvent the term limits, you see, with a funny little... The day organized...
A mob.
Refreshingly... And your opinion, Detective, if I may ask? I'm a curious and talkative person, you see. Of course, officer. I'm glad you asked. There was a woman, the previous forewoman of the Union. She disappeared.
Disappeared?
Yes. On the last day of the local chapter elections, her daughter phoned in and said she wasn't running anymore, or coming to work. Ever. End of story.
This forewoman, her name?
Sadly, the company records do not even give a name. She's just forewoman in private correspondence, Holly. I don't even know if it's a sir or given name, and I don't have access to the Union's files. Does it? The company suspects foul play, but there's nothing they could do. It was a Union matter. The point of the presentation is, these kinds of things happen around the Clares. Watch out when you're dealing with him.
Thank you for your concern, ma'am. We'll be just fine.
Of course. How else can I help? Quite a few things, I'm afraid. The information I'm to share with you includes sensitive trade secrets. For the sake of my employer, I have to ask for your names and badge numbers.
Of course, ma'am. We should have introduced ourselves. I am Lieutenant Kitsuragi, from Precinct 57. And this is my colleague from Precinct 41. I'm afraid he doesn't have his badge at the moment. I hope mine will suffice.
How curious. Why is that, Detective? I see. So, are you saying you lost your badge during the course of this episode? Oh dear. I suppose this does explain some of the more curious turns in our conversation.
She must have been suspecting something for a while now.
As I said, ma'am, his technique may be very unconventional, but he is an officer of the RCM.